one might be, you know, I think probably the most common one is stuff to do with hair. For example, I remember one time I went to an event and it was an event. It was with people who I've seen before, who I've known before, and who see me in different styles as far as fashion is concerned. And the one individual came up to me afterwards, a high-profile individual in the community, a white man came up to me and reintroduced himself to me as if we had never met before. And I was like, and I responded by saying, oh, you know, well, I'm Elise Irvis. This is my title. Remember, we met on this one particular occasion, and I've seen you since then. And he was like, oh, all bamboozled. He said, what, are you working for the Secret Service? I can barely recognize you. Or no, what, are you in WINSEC, Witness Protection Program? Am I in the Witness Protection Program? Because that's how well disguised I was that day by whatever style my hair was. And it's like, okay, commenting, oh, nice hair, new look, I like the new style. What is asking about questions, cool, but to, in a professional setting, address another colleague, can you imagine being told in front of other people, asked if you're in the Witness Protection Program, like the things that would imply? That's one example of microaggression. A lot of times, you know, I work at a bank, another example of microaggressions. People asking for your boss, asking for the next person, you know, I'm a business banker, so when someone wants to talk business, you know, they rather talk to our branch manager. However, my branch manager has never ran a business in her life. She wouldn't know the first thing about starting up a business. I would. You know, that's another microaggression I experience often. I was the black girl that everyone said talked white growing up in school. And it was words that were intended to hurt and most times did hurt. But that was just a part of growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, I think.
I can remember, in fact, even on campus, just alongside of just the teachers and things like that, just the environment there in which many students, just the biases. You think about the learning environment that you actually have to engage in. And there I am as a young African American trying to make sense of this college experience. And I'm hearing white students refer to other black students as thugs, right? And saying, oh, they don't really belong here. They're here because they're on the basketball team or things like that. And just the scarring and trauma, again, in a different kind of way, when you just hear it over and over and over again, these rationales for why you don't belong or your friends don't really belong here. And so these are the conditions in which black people often are learning and having to learn, right? Not in favorable conditions, but literally as their humanity is being questioned and assaulted all the time. I mean, so I've often talked about how, there's this weird way in which my time on campus at this majority historically white campus, on one hand, I would say that it was the friendliest and nicest place you can ever be, right? People are smiling and throwing frisbees around and they're enjoying themselves. And at the exact same time, there are these assaults, these little slights, right? Whether it be people kind of dodging you, not looking you in your eye, acting strange. Things that honestly, my first year, I probably didn't even really fully notice or understand, but you see it over and over and over again, the slights, the comments that just insult either you or your friends. Again, this idea of like calling people thugs, right? Casually, people that they don't even know very well, but so casually just can call someone a thug. And they don't realize just, again, I call it 1,000 paper cuts. And by the 1,000th one, you hurt like hell, right? And you're wounded and you don't leave that place the same as you came because of that. And so I think that we misunderstand that the accumulation of those things is abuse, literally. It's racial abuse. When people are assaulted with those comments over and over and over again, one thing, please, that's not gonna bother me. But if you're immersed and soaked in that all the time, how does your psyche not get wounded from all of that assault ongoing on your humanity?
One of the things that always bothered me at my job is the way that people talked about Harrisburg, but I didn't mention anything because I'm like, am I crazy or is it Is it off for me to challenge this? No, no one should touch your hair. No, no one should be asking you to be the representative for Black people everywhere. Some of those questions might seem silly, but that's how some people may feel when they enter the workforce. Several people at my work warned me, oh, well, you don't want to go over to Harrisburg. And I've had several moments at my job I've heard statements like, oh, well, Harrisburg is a war zone, right? And that's the language that I hear from the people around me. That's the language that I hear from my coworkers. And even in those moments, and that's just like one of many that you have to make this decision. Hey, what do I challenge this right now? Why are they saying this? And then you realize, you watch the local news and you see how Harrisburg is represented. You see why they begin to get that image, and they try to use that as justification. They try to use this idea of, well, every time I hear about Harrisburg, it's because of a shooting. So that's what I believe. And they if you challenge it, they're almost up at arms, and sometimes it's not worth that fight. And that's something that I've dealt with on a systematic basis. So that's probably the biggest example of something that's very specific to. I always try to share that experience and let people know, like, hey, these little statements that people make, it's not okay, but it happens, and we can't always fight it, or we should always fight it if we can, but sometimes we don't have the energy, we don't have the capital to do so. So the importance of names are very important, right? And it goes back to the original sin of this country, right? What did they do? They took us from the mainland, and then they stripped us of our names and then relabeled us, right? That's the whole concept of chattel slavery, right? You're an animal, right? You get a dog, you can just rename a dog, right? But when you have a name, you own that name. There's something that's important to it. We had 2 newer employees who joined with abnormal names. Not abnormal names, abnormal to the standard, right? And you even got to watch, even I have to watch how I'm framing these things, because, but it was 2 names that weren't the typical Judeo-Christian names. And my boss at the time, mentioned these 2 names, said, hey, these were 2 employees that were being added. And then, on a side comment, he was like, well, whatever happened to names like Steve and John? And I looked at him directly, and he, you could tell that he realized what he was doing, and he tried to like pivot and be like, and Basir. And like, there's not a lot of people named Basir, all right? I get that all of the time. And they really want to call me Vincent, right? My last name is Vincent. And depending on the mood I'm in, sometimes I'll be like, oh, don't call me by my slave name. That's if I'm feeling like just kind of targeting somebody. But very honestly, like, my name, Basir, is important. Making sure that people pronounce it right, making sure that people say it right. It's an identity. Making sure that you respect somebody. That goes with names, pronouns, anything. You should do the respect of somebody to refer to them as what they would like to be called. So if I don't give you permission to call me a nickname, don't call me that nickname. If you're going to call me outside my name, we need to have a contract between me and you. And it's up to us to be able to stop that sometimes, because, sometimes it's, I've met people from the South who love calling you honey, right? And sometimes that's fine. Sometimes you have to make that decision. But if you don't feel comfortable with it, I always preach it. Don't allow people to call you outside your name. My name is not whatever they want to call me, whatever shortcut that they try to use. Now, if you build that relationship with them and then you find a way to make a compromise, that's something between you and that individual, but people should do the respect and learn how to collaborate with one another to decide, hey, what's a good way to refer to you? How would you like to be called? I think that's a foundation of respect. And I think that's why names are so important. They're foundations of respect for people.
None of this information is taught. It's all word of mouth. So if you didn't have parents who not only came home from their jobs experiencing microaggression, still had enough gumption to talk about those in a way that it was passed down in a healthy way to their children, not just hate, not the anger of it. Not the further suppression of it. You wouldn't learn it. You wouldn't know it. So if we can just continue to have more of these conversations and bring it back to economics, to how are we spending our money, and holding the people that we do work for, those companies, our employers, holding those people accountable.
I've felt this way for a while. I think the more experiences that I have, I've grown. In college, taking courses, I took sociology courses, and understanding my own kind of potential prejudices, especially in calling people outside of the term that they may want to be called. I've definitely grown in that as I've gotten older, and understood how things work a little bit more, and understood the aspect of respecting people. So it's definitely something that I had some core values in there, but I'm always evolving and growing and learning new things.